Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the Head of Certification Division at ENISA, Mr. Andreas Mitrakas.
Thank you, and many thanks to the organizers for Europe and very kind people like Laurent and Elias, who had good or not so good idea to invite me here today. So it's my first event after the summer break. I might just have my head on the cloud, but my feet are grounded on the, you probably still have some sun grains, as many of us do. So, of course, I've gone through the expectations of the organizers with respect to content, but here I think it's slightly more involving if we focused on the cloud services certification scheme and the story around it, how this whole thing came about, and how sovereignty came right into the middle of it for such a long time, really torturing and involving people in heated discussions. I think I liked John's presentation an awful lot, and I kept his last words, something about the citizens. So by talking about EUCS, we bring the citizen, i.e. public interest, into this discussion. Because it would be slightly naive to overlook the fact that a lot of what we do is done because we have consumers, but we also have citizens. We have private sector and private users, but we have really massive, did I say massive, use of data services and cloud services instigated by governments. And this, of course, is happening in a continuous environment where threats are evolving. Tomorrow is 9/11. I wasn't born, but I heard that something important happened at the time. We got Ukraine, all the challenges it entails with Russian aggression, all that. And of course, we have also affirmation about the threat and how it evolves in a broad sense with the ENISA threat landscape that typically suggests from one year to the next, and with the prospect of 2030, that there's increasing complexity in terms of threats. So from the range of malware, ransomware, we move into misinformation, disinformation, supply chain attacks, an awful lot of complexity. And if you put all that on cloud with a few more keywords, it really makes an explosive mix, and very interesting mix. So, I think I wanted to say three things today. Something about information asymmetry, which is a starting point. Something about the scheme and how it evolved, a starting point. A few more notions. A few words around sovereignty, but from a public sector standpoint. And where this is likely to lead us to, and some next steps for everyone. Of course, I'll use the combined experience that we've gathered from dealing with various requests for certification schemes, as the Commission has graced us with, and gave us an awful lot of work to do over time. So I think a nice starting point for a discussion like this is this notion of the market of lemons, which is a concept that it was based on an economics paper in 1970 by Akerlof, Stiglitz, and Spence, and it earned them a Nobel Prize. So it's a powerful suggestion. There it simply says that the seller typically knows something more than the buyer, so pointing to information asymmetry. And of course, people back in the day, they had the second-hand car market in California when they were talking about it. So when people would start kicking wheels, well, they didn't know exactly that the wheel would fall off that moment or a few kilometers after down the road if once they bought it. But I think when we have our markets inundated with questionable quality goods, be it physical or services, and all the challenges that they entail in terms of vulnerabilities, threats, all sorts of odd behaviors that are completely unwarranted, and the user barely has any idea. Let's also recall that what we're doing in technology hasn't happened before. If you're in take a traditional business in chemistry, metallurgy, where there is probably something that goes back in time. A few things have been invented very recently, but a lot goes back in time. In information technology, we don't have such benefit. We roll from one wave to the next, probably being completely agnostic about what happened a while ago, and there's no way of knowing. So and of course, when Akerlof and et al. Drafted this paper, they had something which is equally powerful. I mean, ex-governor of the central bank, Draghi, published his report yesterday, and as a central banker, he knows that bad money drives out good. What is that supposed to mean? It means that people hoard coins that have a higher percentage in the precious metal than the odd ones. And the odd ones circulate in the market, yeah? So more bad stuff going about, and the good ones is hoarded somewhere in the back, but doesn't produce any value. And we spoke about value in the previous presentations. So I think it's important to keep all that in mind, and if this is perhaps a stencil for us to gaze at this, the consecutive waves of regulation churning out from the EU, and when we see the CRA, it's about products, access to market. Cloud services, we are trying to put filters and say, make sure that, such a complex technology, it really does work in the end of the day, not just for the savvy ones, the ones with deep pockets and they can invest to fix all the problems. Most of them, all would be something to wish for. But it all equally has to work for the consumer, has to work for, the weaker parties in a transaction, the SMEs, the citizens. And so I think also, if you try to walk our way further into the future, we have more instruments like the AI Act, because of course your training data lives on a cloud, on somebody else's cloud, but it's your algorithm, it's your business model behind it. So I think there's plenty of lateral concerns to consider in this case. So my next slide is about what this certification framework looks like. It's a bit of a bigger picture and yet another step back. I'm not pushing you forward yet. But I think we have to keep in mind that we're operating in this digital single market, which is composed of various elements. You need public authorities to accredit certification bodies that rely on conformity assessment reports produced by testing labs, also called conformity assessment bodies. And we have the different frameworks. We have a common criteria framework with its own terminology and requirements. On the cloud, we try to replicate the experience from common criteria to bring it on into services, and we're working with with private associations like the GSMA in a different area to merge their experience into testing equipment also for the cloud, because it's for edge on 5G networks, and bring it into the fold of what accessing the internal market might mean. And this beautiful, funny little slide tells this story. I think we also need to keep in mind that there's a notion related to supervision, because that all happens under the authority of a member state, and that authority has been managed jointly at the EU level. Yeah, but these authorities are sovereign authorities. So here comes public interest again. It comes, the government prowess that mandates how things should be done. And of course, in practical terms, I don't want to make this picture too grim for you or too complex. The experience from one scheme fed into the next one. And if you happen to have flipped the pages of this adopted scheme on common criteria, well, you'll realize that's 80% procedural. You'll hardly find any security controls there. And it was drafted by cybersecurity experts, I can assure you, the best ones we have in Europe. So certification spawning, I think the colors went, it's a bit aberrated here. Apologies for that. I see more aberration further. But I think this helps us see a little a bit clearer. If it weren't for the colors, of course, how cloud in a way sits in the middle, because you need those data centers that with the feature machines that are composed by certified products, they run, you pull your data through, again, equipment on a 5G network that is suitably certified, and the service itself might also be so, and so on and so forth. And then you run your horizontal requirements. You manage security services, your AI algorithms. You have your identification through the wallet, and it all makes for a nice merged overview of what certification could be used for in this case. I think we also need to keep in mind that there's something more that's coming up. Actually, it's out there. It's the Data Governance Act and the Data Act with their requirements about data spaces, which again throws us into the future and it says, if we have not been so successful with sovereignty requirements as a horizontal concern, would it make sense to keep it up for something else in the future? So the background again of how we got to the cloud scheme. The challenges, of course, were related to the types of assessments, the types of requirements, the evaluation levels, and a lot of support came through the experts community. The notion of the assurance level high. And the difference between the assurance level, as it's mentioned on the law, with the evaluation level that was considered as a leeway to accommodate sovereignty requirements. Those came, of course, through the particular consideration from 4 leading member states. So it was Germany, France, Italy, and Spain that put it all together, and they required that the cloud scheme be also included sovereignty requirements, of course, without specifying what sovereignty would be all about. And a lot of back and forth took place, but in our case, which is again under a public interest capacity, so sovereignty essentially means evading the competence, the jurisdiction of another sovereign. So if you had medieval kings here, one would just try to make all the moves around the field in a way that it would evade the wrath of someone else. And what would be the example in this case? Obviously, I think most paths would lead to the Cloud Act in the United States. Of course, we cannot. I'm not prepared to comment on that. But I mean, of course, there are conditions which are, if actuated, they might cause concern to jurisdictions, to legitimate interests in among the sovereign member states of the EU, and of course that was what people thought that they would prevent if they had those so-called sovereignty requirements inserted. Of course, that was back in the day, because from 2021, when we presented the first edition of the cloud scheme right before Christmas, until the 15th of March this year, we came into full circle. So sovereignty requirements came in, they blazed their path, and then they completely vanished. Currently, they're not there. So I think a sigh of relief is led each time that most people realize that the complex discussion concerning the sovereignty requirements in the cloud scheme are not going to be followed any further. Now the scheme itself still keeps its basic features, so the three levels, basic, substantial, and high. We had discussed possibilities about use cases, what could go into assurance level high if you had further requirements inserted. All that is not necessary anymore. But likely possible good use cases for the level that would go above high would be aspects that concern directly the interest of the state, functions that can only be reserved for the state, and they would put state interests at risk if they had to be dealt differently. Of course, now looking into having a bit of a post-mortem of sorts, things look significantly more simplified. As John tried to provide definition of sovereignty in the cloud, I will also indulge into this. And I should think that for sovereignty, essentially, we need two ingredients. One is data localization, which is very important for certain functions. If you take personal data, for instance, and most service providers deal with that, not all of them, but most. You need to consider data localization. That's quite important. And then the other condition is the service provider being subjective to country of origin rules. So if a service provider operates in another country, the country of origin rules should take backstage, should be allayed somehow. They should be perhaps not even be put in place if possible. And that's precisely the tone that EUCS explored for quite some time. But sovereignty is not something that is gone. It seems that it's here to stay. We expect that the forthcoming Commission will have also a sovereignty and industry kind of function. And we saw also on the report of, it's premature, of course, to make comments on the report of Mario Draghi, but it's such a compelling piece of material, report that it's impossible to evade it. So it seems that the notion permeates and is still there, but not for cloud. I mean, at least Draghi made it very clear in his report that the future does not look very bright if you put sovereignty and your cloud services. Cloud is great if there's a combination of forces. If hyperscale prowess, drive for innovation is combined with the lakes of data, and it serves the needs of the public sector, the SMEs, the businesses in Europe. And that's quite encouraging, because if ever this scheme is adopted, as it will be, I think it will fit quite nicely in such a collaborative and added value context. So under this light, it seems that a lot of ground has been covered already across the EU, and we're looking into, we understand this environment slightly more and slightly better. So with no concern about sovereignty, and with no use cases to talk about except of things that concern the state, and it's very difficult to talk about it, because that is something for the member states to discuss. I suppose that ring-fencing state functions in the absence of sovereignty requirements on a cloud scheme because it becomes the next big challenge. Because it's illogical to think that member states would all of a sudden waive their requirements just because we don't have this extra safeguard, this extra scarf to protect against the weather. So there, one could imagine that other measures, we have some examples, other measures might be actuated. We might just see all of a sudden procurement rules being used as a layer of additional to insert additional conditions when selecting services. We see that with the Digital Europe program and the concern about managed security, cybersecurity services, the EU background becomes instrumental. I mean, companies that have an EU background are eligible, others might not be so. And as I mentioned, we really have to understand what the impact of the sprawling instruments, and there have AI, the AI Act in mind, the Data Act and the Data Governance Act, how those instruments might be used in order to set conditions for to the benefit of the users in defense of public interest in relation to cloud services. So what comes next? What comes next is that we're still waiting on the member states committee, that's the ECCG, to pass its opinion on the current version of the scheme. And hopefully when that is done, the final version will be transmitted, and thereafter the Commission will simply table the legislative proposal on the dedicated comitology on a specific committee for voting. A timeline currently would be too risky to suggest because I've done that before and I failed and failed again, so failing in front of you would make me look like a failure. And I don't want to do that again. So I can only apologize for the long time that these things take. But again, it's the first time that anybody is doing certification at this level. And if I wanted just to start closing this presentation, I'm using a quote from Marissa Mayer, fingers on the keyboard. I should think that standardization is equally giving us a nice leeway. We have a piece of a standard that was recently adopted, and it sets for the first time in the EU the security objectives if you do cloud. I mean, it's great if you do certification and cloud, but it's also great if you do cloud yourself and you would like to see what are the best controls that you would like to propose to your CISO or to your CO for it. We also have two more relevant standards that are pending at the SEN level, and hopefully they will also be adopted. Now, if you happen to know somebody who holds the vote for your company, tip them off. It's not such a bad idea to move things forward in this difficult year of 2024, where so many changes are happening at the European level. So this is my last slide. I see that we have a wee bit of time, but I'm also expecting an awful lot of questions as well. So many thanks for your attention.
Many, many thanks, Mr. Mitrakas. So we do have questions, starting from the chat already. The first one is from Thomas Flambeau, and his question is, so will the EU Cloud Services High be immune to non-EU laws, such as the Cloud Act and FISA 702?
effectively, as there will be no sovereignty requirements in this draft candidate certification scheme, then whatever is initiated as through a subpoena, for instance, will be executed fully. I mean, that's how it will look like in the future. Maybe there are instruments under procedure law that could be used, which I cannot imagine what they would be right now. But indeed, there will be no sovereignty requirements on the EU CS scheme. And that's what we know since the 15th of March this year.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I hope that answers the question, dear Thomas. From our online audience. I will take a second question from the online audience while one of you can prepare already and raise your hand. Yes, we have Mr. here, so someone will come with a mic for you. The second question in the meantime from the chat is from Yatin Bansal, and his question is, so will EUCS be exact replica of SecNum Cloud?
Well, I wonder if we would need to go through the arduous experience of the last 4.5 years just to end up to a point that was known beforehand. The simple answer is no. It will not be. And it cannot be because we need to have 27 member state representatives agreeing on voting, adopting legislative acts on EUCS. It is not a concern for a single member state. I mean, important as SecNum Cloud and as well as C5 and all the other schemes that we have across the member states, they may be, they represent the provisions laid out in a single member state. Here we're looking at something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Sir.
Hello.
Your name and your company?
Matthew Newman. I'm from MLEX. I'm a reporter. Also about the SecNum Cloud. So if you could just clarify if this current scheme is finally approved and there's the comitology process, what would it mean for the SecNum Cloud? Would the French still be able to impose their own sovereignty requirements, or would the EUCS basically nullify what the French have done in the last couple of years? If that's the case, then what about other member states? Would other member states have to toe the line and follow exactly what's in the EUCS?
Yeah, no, many thanks for this question, and it's a dodgy one, because you're asking me effectively to make a comment on what will happen in a member state, which I cannot do because I wouldn't know. I would know very little outside the realm of ENISA in any way. I can only recall, in answering your question, the provision from the Cybersecurity Act, which stipulates that if you have a scheme which has been adopted, and there is a national scheme which covers the same area, the same application area, then the member state scheme stops being applied as from the date of coming into force of the European one. So if we assume that SecNum Cloud covers the exact application area as EUCS, once EUCS is adopted sometime in the future, then at some other point in the future, when EUCS becomes applicable, SecNum Cloud will stop having any legal effects. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've got a lot of questions here and online. So I will take one from Sir over there, and then we will move on to the next. But please make sure you can go check the questions, submit your questions. Speakers will also be available during the upcoming breaks. So thank you so much for all of your interactions. Sir.
Thank you very much. Andreas, thank you. Fantastic presentation as always. My name is Goran Gotov. I'm from Ruth Peterson Public Affairs. We are a Brussels-based consultancy. And my question is to Andreas, and Andreas, apologies for this, it's a bit tricky, especially knowing your position as an official of ENISA, but we know that the Cybersecurity Act, which governs the certification framework, is due to be revised. at some point towards next year. We already heard from the European Commission over the past few months that that this is sort of in the planning, that they're planning to including also focus on the cybersecurity certification framework. So my question to you is, as the lead official in charge of for ENISA, what is the one thing that you would sort of would be on your wish list in the revised version to make the certification framework even better, even more efficient than it currently is?
Yeah, Gordon, many thanks, and it's nice that knowledgeable people like you release information by simply asking questions. So you give a lot of answers to other questions just by asking a simple question like this. Look, it's I think in one of the two presentations, I can't remember if it was John or Laurent. I think it was John who mentioned it. Said time. So I would say if we want to change something, then let's consider time, meaning let's put a framework, a term, a period, or a deadline, a point in time when something can start and something can finish. Because this openness, permissibility, glorious as it is, and relaxing as it make everyone feel, is not quite effective. Because you see, we have so much work. It's too much meat on the grill and nothing to serve, or very little to serve. So that's the thing. I think we need to be slightly more regimental, more controlled about these things. Of course, we can take lateral requirements, and by all means, the member states they participate in all sorts of ways in the way that these schemes have been promulgated. But indeed, time is a matter of concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Andreas Mitrakas, for your valuable answers.
Great. Many thanks.
So.